Hello, welcome to Gimpy's History Corner. I'm Gimpy. At least that's what my grandsons call me, Alice and Archie, here with their mom and dad, riding a ferry boat up towards the Statue of Liberty. Okay, so video number 78 is on World War II. And a chapter in this book by Stephen Ambrose called Citizen Soldiers. And it's on chapter 14, which he entitled Jerks, Sad Sacks, Profiteers, and Jim Crow. So most of this book is all about the great things that American citizen soldiers did in World War II. The U.S. Army from Normandy beaches to the Bulge to the surrender of Germany, 1944 to 1945. I got this book because that's the time period my father was engaged in the battles in World War II. He landed in Italy, I believe, and came up through France, ended up in Germany in 44 and 45. I've done videos on that before. But Stephen Ambrose is a pretty good author. He's chapter 14. Basically says, not all American soldiers in World War II were brave and competent. So this is kind of the bad news part of World War II as far as the soldiers went. And I'm going to tie it into a famous novel written in 1961. Okay, the first category are jerks. That's an old term. We don't use that much anymore. But when I was a kid growing up, if you were a jerk, that was a bad thing. These are soldiers who were selfish, reckless, or abusive of power. Lots of times these were officers, of course, pushing their way around and making bad decisions. They were hoarding goods or manipulating supply chains, endangering others through reckless indifference. So, just, bad people doing bad things that endangered other people, maybe got them killed or in danger, or got themselves thrown into brig. He calls those jerks. I think there's jerks in every organization all around the world. Unfortunately, that's just the way people are. The next category are sad sacks. These are inept, unlucky, or simply overwhelmed by the chaos of war. So these are people who probably should not be there. Went through the training, maybe been in the Army for a while, maybe they're an officer, but things just get overwhelming. They can't handle the pressure, they make bad decisions. They're constantly in trouble. Have bad luck, or through poor leadership or sheer exhaustion, they make bad decisions and do stupid things. Those are called sad sacks. Not a term we use anymore. That's a really old term, even probably older than jerks. Sad sacks and jerks. Okay, profiteers and the black market. Oh, America had an abundance of goods sent to Europe and to the Pacific theaters. And sometimes it did not end up where it was supposed to. There was a black market started in Europe, started in Italy with the mafia down there in southern Italy. No way. Soldiers traded cigarettes, chocolate, and rations for luxury items like perfume and jewelry. I don't think I'd give up chocolate for jewelry. Some exploited the system for personal gain, becoming full-blown profiteers. There's famous stories about American officers. You remember in the movie Monuments Men, they went around trying to find the art that the Nazis had stolen from all over Europe. Well, some of that did not end up in museums. Some of it ended up in the personal collections of some American officers, and they got caught eventually. That's an example of a profiteer. Okay, most of the profiteers, like I said, came out of Italy. I think Naples was a famous profiteer city. We just had so much stuff. Our American industries created it and sent it over there. Unfortunately, the same thing happened with money in the war in Iraq. Famous stories of Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, saying, well, we sent over this much money and we don't know where most of it went. It just disappeared. Holy mackerel. How does that happen? Well, it's just a big operation, lots of people involved, lots of warehouses, and with things like chocolate and cigarettes, things like that, it just goes missing. People get rich or get wealthy from that. Jim Crow and racial inequality. Black soldiers were often relegated to support roles and denied combat opportunities. Jim Crow was the system set up in the southern states of the United States after Civil War to keep the freed black slaves in their place, as they said. Rules about where blacks could go and could not go. Same applied to the military. Military's adherence to Jim Crow policies stood in stark contrast to the ideals of freedom and democracy we were supposedly fighting for. Yep. Okay, Ambrose writes, there were jerks and sad sacks and profiteers and cowards and a few traitors, but they were vastly outnumbered by the brave, competent, and the selfless. I would agree with that. Now, there was a famous book written in America in 1961 by a guy named Joseph Heller. He was a former soldier in World War II, called Catch-22. It was made into a famous movie with Alan Arkin. And it portrayed a lot of these characters. It was a comedy. It was a dark comedy because there was men dying in combat. It was based on a Air Force bombing unit stationed on an island off the coast of Italy, and they would do bombing runs over Italy. And the point of the book was that I don't know if it was an Air Force in World War II or if it was just Army Air Corps. But they had these big B-52 bombers, and they would fly over Italy, and some of them would get shot down by anti-aircraft guns. And you'd send off 20 planes, and 18 would come back, and you'd never see them again because they were killed. And one of the captains was Yossarian, and he says, I'm at 35 trips. The limit used to be 25, and they rotated you out back to the United States because you just go crazy with the stress. Then they raised it to 50. He says, I want out. I don't want to do this anymore. And he went to a doctor. Says, labeling me as insane, as crazy, so that I don't have to fly anymore. And the doctor said, "Why?" So, "I don't want to die. I'm afraid of dying." Well, that's the catch. If you are crazy, you can't fly. But if you ask not to have to fly anymore, you're not crazy. So it's normal not to want to fly because you're afraid. But if you can't prove you're crazy, you can't go. You have to go. That's the catch. So it's the whole book is about Yossarian trying to get out of flying bombing missions because he's over the limit. He thought originally was told when he signed up was 25 trips, and he was at 35, and now they're making him go 50. And the movie and the book is full of characters that are sad sacks and jerks and profiteers. So in Catch-22, the jerks were Colonel Cathcart and Lieutenant Scheisskopf, who were more interested about promotion and parade formations than human lives. So they're depicted, obviously, as just jerks who don't care about the men going off and dying in these flights. The sad sacks are Major, who is incompetent, never wants to see anyone. He was promoted because he's the kind that would hide from responsibility and didn't want any responsibility, but it kept finding him. And he got promoted. He was a captain, and then he was a major. And his real name was Major. His mom thought that was funny, I guess. And his thing was, I have an office, but you can only come into my office when I'm not there. I don't want to see anybody or talk to anyone. So he was always hiding. And Dr. Nika, who was the one who came up with Catch-22, men trapped by incompetence, bad luck, or the system itself. Yeah, that was Major. Played by Bob Newhart in the movie. Great job. Heller uses these characters to show how war is not just dangerous, but absurd. The war profiteer was Milo Minderbinder, played by John Voight, who runs a syndicate who sells items to both sides. Very satirical role. And Yossarian is the pilot I told you about, frustrated by Catch-22 that forces him to keep flying bombing missions even after he's over the limit. Supposedly he didn't have to fly anymore. It's one of the best books I've ever read. Just the craziness of a huge organization like the United States Army Air Corps and the crazy people that we put in charge of human lives. Unfortunately, that has remained pretty much the same over the years. Okay, that's video number 78. Jerks, Sad Sacks, Profiteers, and Jim Crow. From this book by Stephen Ambrose, famous author, Citizen Soldiers. My dad was a citizen soldier. As far as I know, he was not any of these characters we talked about today, but I'm sure if I could interview him today, he'd say, "Oh yeah, I knew some," because they're everywhere. Sometimes they even get elected president. Thank you. Have a great day.